Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Steelers Afternoon Drive. I'm Alan Saunders. No Brendan Rossai intro. No Zachary Smith, which just feels so strange. It's like the children have been allowed to take over Afternoon Drive. It's me. It's DB. Smitty is on his way to Indy for the Royal Rumble. So I guess we'll have to get his thoughts on that on Monday. I am not in my familiar background. I'm actually in Pensacola. I left Mobile this afternoon, headed to Orlando for the Senior Bowl. Going to fly from here to there. I'm sorry, for the Super Bowl. After leaving wait, hold on. I was in Mobile for the Senior Bowl, then I'm going to Orlando for the Pro Bowl, then New Orleans for the Super Bowl. I'm in a bowl somewhere near the Gulf. It is what it is. DB, what's up? How you doing?
Well, my travel schedule looks a lot lighter, not nearly as exhilarating as yours. I am still in the great city of Louisville, Kentucky, where it's actually pretty nice out today. So I'm excited. I get to go actually like run outside instead of going to the gym. So yeah, I'm excited about that. We got some interesting stuff coming up. We're only like a month away from the combine, which I realized when you texted me about it about a week ago, which I'm pretty excited about. So yeah,
there you go. So the first thing I want to talk about today is the sort of big piece of news that came out today that Steelers linebackers coach Aaron Curry will not be returning for 2025 after 2 seasons with the team. He's moving on to the New York Jets to be linebackers coach there on the new staff under Aaron Glenn and Steve Wilkes, defensive coordinator. What was the first thing that went through your mind when you got that piece of news today that Curry wasn't coming back?
yeah. I mean, I think for me it was a little bit of a surprise, but because I just wasn't sure. It's always tough for me to gauge like whose contract's up, whose is not. Curry wasn't one of the guys that I would have kind of like targeted as like, oh, okay, I want to turn this position coach over. You know what I'm saying? I was fairly happy with the way that Peyton Wilson came along during the season. I actually thought that Wilson was going to have probably a larger learning curve coming out of college just because of the system that he came into. And I just think off-ball linebacker, it's like one of the hardest transitions really in this league. But I thought Wilson like played pretty solid throughout the season. There's definitely some stuff that he needs to continue to work on. But the fact that they were able to get that many snaps of him out there on the field was pretty impressive. So yeah, I mean, Curry, I thought he was going to be a guy that would stick around. So I'm very curious on like where they kind of go to kind of fill that position moving forward.
Yeah, I agree with you. If you look at this through the lens of developing the young players, like I think you look at Peyton Wilson, I think he had a really good rookie year, arrow way up on his trajectory. And you mentioned the off-ball linebacker transition, especially considering like his role at NC State was not anything close to what he was being asked to do with the Steelers. Very different defensive scheme, and they moved him around a lot at NC State. So I really like that. And I thought Landon Roberts played really well the last 2 seasons with Curry as his coach. Feel like they got the most out of that. And last year, if you remember, they had all those injuries at linebacker, and like was really impressed with the way that Landon Roberts stepped up down the stretch when he was kind of the only guy left holding everything together. They brought Miles Jack in off his couch, and I thought they got good play out of him. So like I think there was a lot to point to that you like from what Curry had done. I think the one thing on the other side of that is the Steelers spent a boatload of money on Patrick Queen this offseason. Despite the fact that I'm going to be seeing him at the Pro Bowl tomorrow, I don't think he played up to their or his expectations for himself this year. So if you look at it specifically through that lens, it's like, hey, spent all this money on Patrick Queen, looking for an all-pro linebacker, and didn't necessarily get that level of play. What can we get? What can we do to get that out of him? Maybe making a change of position coach is the one thing you can do. I don't think that Aaron Curry is a bad coach, and I'm a little surprised that he's not coming back. I do think his contract was probably up. I don't know that for sure, but 2 years is pretty standard for a new hire as a position coach. So that part of it would make a lot of sense as well. But yeah, I was a little surprised that not just that like he is moving on, but also this was the first one that we're hearing about. That was the first place that we saw some kind of move. And that doesn't mean that others won't be happening. But I think all that put together is a little bit surprising. And yeah, I mean, it's a lateral move. That's not particularly shocking. But, when a guy lands on his feet that quickly, you kind of think, well, I mean, it's not like the league thinks Aaron Curry's a bad linebackers coach or something like that. And I don't think that either. So I don't know how much this is just, them looking to make some kind of change and say, hey, here's an easy one to make because it's a guy that's not under contract, and we do have this sort of justification through the season that Patrick Queen had, or if maybe there's something else in the works here in terms of who they might be targeting. What kind of coach do you expect them to look at for that linebackers coach? Is there anybody you've got in your head right now that you think would be a good fit for him?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it would be interesting if they went with like another former player. Curry was a guy who played in the NFL, was a really big time like prospect coming out of college as well. He didn't necessarily have ties to Mike Tomlin that I recall when he came to Pittsburgh. There are guys out there that I've already kind of pinpointed as like maybe potential targets. I mean, Joe Barry, who was the defensive coordinator for the Packers, he also coached with Tomlin in Tampa Bay. That was a many moons ago, but they coached together for several years. Barry didn't coach, to my knowledge, last year because the Packers went in a different direction for their DC job. Would Barry want to like come back and coach linebackers? I don't know. I mean, that's kind of where his specialty has been throughout his NFL career. Do they go with somebody who's, maybe like an up and coming guy, maybe poach somebody from the college ranks, go the former player route? I'm just interested. Like, I think it's always tough to like kind of gauge where the position coaches stuff will land just because you don't really know a lot about those guys and like their responsibilities, not just like what they've done, but what they're going to do for like in the Steelers role. Cause I mean, they've got Denzel Martin on the staff, but to my knowledge, like he mostly works with like the edge rusher guys. But Carl Dunbar like has a long worked with like some of the edge rusher, like pass rushing stuff too. So I'm sure there's going to be some overlap, but I'm curious on where it goes. I mean, Barry's a guy that makes sense just because he's worked with Tomlin, but I think that the scope of things will probably be much larger than that.
Yeah, I agree. I wonder, and I think Barry's a good shout. I wonder how much they're going to use this opening as an opportunity to add someone to this coaching staff with some significant experience.
Mm-hmm.
Like they did when they first brought Terrell Austin in, for example. Like they still had Tom Bradley on the staff as defensive backs coach, but they added Terrell Austin, who had been an NFL defensive coordinator. And like I feel like that's probably the route they're going to go in terms of just like the big picture coaching staff and trying to make some changes, is instead of firing a whole bunch of people, trying to add to the staff some way. And I think like this is an area where like if you bring in someone like Brooks or someone like Gerard Mayo, for example, who like Antonio Pierce, Barry's a good example of like that had been at a higher position. You bring them in as not just the position coach, but as a way to supplement Terrell Austin in the overall defensive decision-making process, then I think you could leave this feeling like, hey, that was a good move.
Yeah, another name that I would shout out. I think the Mayo thing is a good shout. Mainly just because, like, for me personally, that New England situation last year is a really tricky situation because I really did feel like there was a lot of times where Mayo was getting in front of a microphone, and I just thought to myself, like, man, this dude's like way over his head. But at the same time, like, there was such a devoid of talent there that like it's hard to really say that like he underachieved with the roster that they got. I mean, they had by far the league's least talented offensive roster in football last year, in my opinion, and like they were still like somewhat functional once like Drake May got in the fold. So Mayo would be a shout because I do think like he's a guy who had an incredible reputation like league wide because like the Crafts and like all the New England bros, like we're telling everybody like this is the next best thing, like this is going to be the greatest thing, like he's the perfect successor to Bill. And obviously the Patriots thought that at one point. But another guy that I would shout out was on that staff last year, Dante Hightower. Hightower doesn't necessarily like, obviously he played his whole career with the Patriots, but Hightower did, you remember this because you were covering the team at this point, but Hightower did like take a free agency visit to the Steelers. And there was a little bit of interest there as well. A lot of people kind of think that he maybe took that visit to maybe prop up his value from New England, but Hightower's a heck of a player, man. I mean, a true like unicorn at the position, noted as like a really smart player too. So like as an inside linebackers coach, I mean, I think he only has 1 year of experience. I think last year was his first one working under Mayo. They're not bringing him back to my knowledge under Vrabel's staff. So he'd be a guy that I would at least like, I'd want to talk to and just kind of see if you were going to go like the former player route. And he does have a little bit of experience. So.
Yeah, and of course, you should mention, I mean, they do have Ryan Shazier and Vince Williams on their coaching staff, neither of which
Hmm.
were coaching inside linebackers this past year. I don't know if that's a move that necessarily like is a big move the needle for me, but they both seem like they're kind of obvious options, at least at this
Hmm.
point. I mean, just because they are on the staff and they did play inside linebacker, so I mean, I think they should at least be in consideration.
Yeah, for sure. I would agree with that.
Anything else about the coaching staff as it stands right here that you feel like um, is worth bringing up? I mean, we did hear over this week Art Rooney say, and of course they were both at the Senior Bowl that the both coordinators, Terrell Austin and Arthur Smith, will be back. What do you make of the state of the Steelers coaching staff, and should we expect to see more of these moves that are not maybe necessarily the earth-shattering ones that people were hoping for, but could still end up being significant?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think that their lack of change, at least on the surface, is rather like uninspiring, to be honest with you. I just think it's a weird direction to kind of go in. Not that I'm like overly surprised about the direction. It just feels weird that they lost, five straight games down the stretch, double digit margin of defeat. You get basically stomped out by, their rival Baltimore Ravens in the first round of the playoffs, and then they're basically going to bring back all the key components of the roster. I just don't. To me, that just doesn't really send like a great message, in my opinion, to the fan base that you're really striving to be more than just a competent team or a competitive team. Um, it doesn't really scream like, "Hey, we know that we're not close," which Rooney did acknowledge. Like he doesn't think they're. He even said like it's hard to say that we're even any closer now than we were when we last spoke last year, or whatever. So yeah, the message to me is just rather uninspiring. It's a little bit confusing that you would bring back, head coach, general manager. Of course, Omar Khan's like only been there a couple of years now, but you're going to bring back offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator. I mean, it seems like the offensive line coach. I mean, Rooney even alluded to the possibility more like the reality that one of the two quarterbacks is coming back. So I don't know. It's like those are the areas where you would expect like the big changes year over year to come from. And that doesn't mean you can't improve the roster. Like you absolutely can build it up around those guys. It just, to me, I was kind of just expecting, even if it's just like a fall guy type of move, like them replacing that defensive coordinator, even with Mike Tomlin being like, the number one guy on that side of the ball. Just felt like get one of those maybe, but it doesn't seem like it.
Yeah, that Pat Meyer could have been a possible like sort of fall guy as
Hmm.
well. Things you could point to: the development of Broderick Jones, maybe not necessarily the world's smoothest fit with Arthur Smith's scheme, and you could kind of
Sure.
justify that as like a major change, but it doesn't seem like that's going to happen either. Let's shift gears. You talked about improving the roster. That was the focus of these guys here at the Senior Bowl. I know you've been back grinding the tape that gets sent back. I've been here on the ground. My big takeaway from the Senior Bowl is I'm with you on the kind of Steelers staff decisions and like big picture personnel decisions not providing a lot of optimism. But I think I'm leaving Mobile with a lot more optimism about their ability to significantly improve their team at the positions where they have needs in this year's draft. I think this is a really, really good draft class at defensive line and running back, both positions the Steelers are going to need to fill. And also, I think there are enough good players at wide receiver where they're drafting that they'll be able to get one of those as well. And man, that would be like quite a haul in terms of upgrading the talent level on this team if they can accomplish all that this year. What have you sort of noticed from a big picture perspective in the tape that you've been grinding from the Senior Bowl?
Yeah, I mean, I think the positions I was mostly focused on were like the ones that you were kind of alluding to. Cornerback, wide receiver. It was unfortunate that we had some guys, some of the better players or more intriguing prospects at those positions kind of pull out of the game. Like Eligai Manor from Stanford was kind of hoping to see him there. Savion Williams from TCU. But I mean, Savion Williams' teammate, Jack Beck, I thought had a good week. I mean, he's a really physical dude. He plays to his size, can go up and high point the football. I thought like he was winning really with like strength and physicality, really all week long. And like even some other guys, like I was just kind of trying to like, because the All-Star games and like these practices are a really small component of these guys' scouting report. But like for me, I always think about like I'm trying to fill in like blanks to guys' scouting reports. And a couple that I was able to kind of look at was Jalen Royals from Utah State, wide receiver. He's a guy that I highlighted like coming out of summer, was super productive before he got hurt last year. He had 4 straight 100-yard games. And then he had like a lower leg injury that ended up ending his season. I think I read some reports, some interviews from various people on social media saying that he didn't feel like he was 100% yet. But I was impressed by like the way that he was getting off the line of scrimmage. Like his release package against press coverage was something that I wanted to see there. And like just his route running in general, I felt like he had a really good feel for like how to get open. There was nuance to his game, even without that like signature explosiveness. He's a guy that makes a lot of things happen after the catch. Now, another guy that I would like to highlight is Louisville cornerback Quincy Riley. I thought that he was one of the better players that I saw at the game. Riley, for me, when I was watching his tape, there was a lot to like in terms of like what he can do as a cover guy. But I wanted to see like there was definitely times on tape where I felt like he was getting beat deep. Whether it was like lack of urgency, like getting to the inside hip, or just guys blowing by him. But at the Senior Bowl, I didn't see any of that. Like I thought that he did a really nice job, like running with fade routes up the sideline. I tweeted out a play from the one-on-one films, and anytime like you get a corner that has like an excellent like teach tape rep in one-on-ones, it's always notable because of how geared towards the offense that specific drill is. So yeah, there was a lot of guys that I felt like helped themselves. I thought Azareye'h Thomas, like one of my favorite prospects in the class, I thought he had a really good, like, started a little bumpy day one. I thought he had some trouble with Tez Johnson. But I thought, like, as the week went on, like, he really started to find his groove, and he had an excellent day 3 from what I saw as well.
Yeah, he was awesome. You talk about those one-on-ones. He went back-to-back reps with an interception and, like, the easiest looking pass breakup of all time.
Yeah.
Looked like
super
you get
smooth,
dominant wins like that in those drills. Like, those really stand out. And I also talked to him after that practice. I think that, for me, is the biggest thing that I'm trying to do when I'm here, is that I kind of want to get to know what these guys are like as people, the like between the rep stuff, how they act, how their body language. You try to figure out what kind of football player they're going to be. And I thought he was just a guy that was very confident, but also like sort of very realistic about the way he approaches. He's like, this is like cheating for the offense. Like, if I lose one of these, it is no big deal. Like, I'm just going back out there and doing my thing. Like, none of these routes really exist. And so I think just that confidence from him, I thought was striking, and I thought that was really nice. I'll sticking with the corners and the wide receivers. A couple other guys that I really liked were Jaden Higgins from Iowa State. I know he's a guy that like is probably going to test really well. He's big. He doesn't have like the world's most well-rounded like route tree stuff. Like, he doesn't necessarily stop and start really well, but he's just really smooth and fluid. And I think he's someone that if they're looking for another big outside presence, there's not a lot of those in this draft. You mentioned Savion Williams not being here. Trey Harris was at the Shrine Bowl. I haven't got to see anything that he did. But like after like those are the 3 guys like bigger than 6'2". Like that's pretty much it. Like, there's not a whole lot out there if you want like a big wide receiver. And so I was really interested to get eyes on him, and I thought he had a pretty good week. You mentioned Jack Bech. I think he was awesome. Steelers don't have anything like him. I'd love to see what he looks like in an Arthur Smith offense. I think that's really intriguing. And Ty Felton from Maryland is a guy that popped for me as well. Just in terms of his like ball tracking, like the quarterback play was not very good this week. There were a lot of balls.
It was bad, Alan. You can say it. It was bad.
Not put anywhere near. Like, there's so many reps where like I'm trying to get it on my phone, right? So I'm just like doing this. I'm like, where the ball? That just never comes into the screen. So I thought he was one of those receivers that was able to kind of make some hay with like, hey, this ball is not where it's supposed to be, but he went up and found a way to track it and make a play on the ball and catch it anyway. That he was one of the few guys that was able to sort of thrive in that environment. In terms of corner, I wasn't necessarily as focused on them. I like the Kansas State guy as far as the slot. I thought he showed some real physicality and some toughness. Yeah, Parrish. And then Upton Stout from Western Kentucky down your way. He's little. There's a lot of like rep like duplication in terms of what you already have in Beanie Bishop, but like he's a good player in terms of slot corners.
Yeah, Stout was a guy that he was probably my biggest surprise because like he was somebody that I hadn't watched coming into the Senior Bowl. So it's funny, Nick Martin, my buddy that does a lot of good NFL draft stuff. Like I literally, he and I like, were talking 2 days ago, and I literally sent him a message and literally said Upton Stout with the eyes emoji because I've been pretty intrigued, man. Like for a small guy, like he really held his own. I felt like at the Senior Bowl, obviously a huge bump in competition. Maxwell Harrison, I thought he had some moments. I think for Harrison,
Yeah, that's a good call.
quarterback for Kentucky, the thing with him is like you can watch his film and you can still see like the areas where he really needs like fine tuning in terms of like really needs to do a better job of like staying low on his pedal, some eye discipline stuff. But in terms of like athleticism, the kid's a freak athlete. He didn't quite come in like measurable wise where he was listed at. I think he came in like sub 6 foot tall, a little
Yeah, I
bit
think it's
shorter
5'11".
arms, a little bit shorter arms than I was kind of hoping for or anticipating, but the kid can really move. There's a lot of potential with him as well. So yeah, I mean, I think it was a fairly good week. The one-on-one stuff does like frustrate me to no end just because of like some of these releases that these cats are trying to pull off, man. It's like they're taking 2.5 seconds to get into their route. And it's like, dude, by the time you're at the break point, brother, like your quarterback's on his back. Like there's just no way. So, but if you excuse that, like I said, I'm usually looking for like just technique stuff in terms of like, do they have a release plan? Like, how do they look getting out and out of their breaks? And the defenses, any type of good reps that you can come up with in that type of drill is really eye popping to me. One of the things I wanted to talk about, you mentioned just trying to get to know players, like where they're at mentally and like what kind of person they are, how do they act in between drills. That's the exact stuff that like scouts are trying to do too, because they're trying to fill in the blanks because they've already got a plethora of notes in their scouting reports on like what kind of caliber of players these guys are. So it's really about the competition level, seeing if they can rise to the competition, also how they conduct themselves in between the lines and also off the field in the interview process. So one of the things I liked about, I think it was Thomas. I saw an interview with him on social media. I feel really bad for not citing who this was from. I'll try to tweet it out if I can on my Twitter. But I think he was talking about like how Tez Johnson was giving him some issues on that first day. And I think like one of the things that he was talking about was just that he was bringing his feet up too far off the ground and kind of splitting his feet off the release point. And that's just a big thing with like corners. You want to have light feet, but you want to keep them close to the ground because you can't move if they're off the ground. So, but yeah, I thought as the week went on, he played a lot better. And there's gonna be a lot of good players. And we didn't even talk about some of the defensive linemen that I think you probably got a better view of than I did. Like Walter Nolan from Ole Miss, I thought he had some flashes. Obviously, he's a super talented kid. Among other guys, I think that made themselves a lot of money.
Yeah. Sticking with corner for 1 second, where do you see that in terms of the team's needs, and where
Mm-hmm.
should that be in the priority list? I know, obviously, like Mike Tomlin, very interested in the defensive line here this week, along with Andy Weidel, Omar Khan, Terrell Austin, and
Yep.
when Arthur Smith was here, he was mostly looking at the wide receivers, a little bit of the offensive line, the tight ends as well. I didn't see a lot of people focused on the corners. Where do you think that should fall in terms of their sort of offseason priority list?
Yeah, man, it's really tough. I think for me, I think when I did my own YouTube video on like their top 5 needs, I think I put it at 3 and 4 because I think they need a boundary corner and I also think they need a slot corner. Slot corner has been something that they've really, um, you know, haven't prioritized like whatsoever over the past several years. Really, since Mike Hilton like walked out of the organization, like they haven't really spent a lot of money. They really kind of put patch hole work over that position. So I'd like to see like a long-term solution there. Do they think that Beanie Bishop can be that guy? Kind of a little bit skeptical considering they were playing Cam Sutton over him really down the stretch, and I don't anticipate him being back next year. And then like boundary corner, like getting somebody to complement Joey Porter Jr. Is definitely something that I think that they should look at, especially for a team that's going to live in, we already mentioned they're bringing the coaching staff back, right? So like Mike Tomlin, Tara Austin's coming back. We know what the structure, the foundation of the defense is going to be built on. If you're going to play a lot of single high, you're going to play a lot of cover 3, a lot of cover 1, you're going to need some dudes on the outside. And I think right now, some of the guys that they were trying to play last year, in particular like Dante Jackson, not necessarily guys that are built to play like man coverage, maybe like 36, 37% of the snaps. So I think getting another guy that's talented enough on the outside to hold up one-on-one, especially in this type of division, right? Like you're going to have, your Jamar Chases of the world, you're going to have to go up against that. And then even like when you get into the playoffs, facing some of the better wide receivers. So I'm interested to see, like more than anything, I think we talked about this a couple episodes ago, just kind of the archetype of player that they want opposite Porter. Like, do they want to prioritize like continuing to get someone like Porter, who's maybe like a kick step player that could play and press, want somebody that's kind of long, be physical with guys, or do they want somebody maybe with a little bit more speed, like similar to kind of Jackson's profile? Do they want, somebody that maybe is more of an off coverage player? That way you can kind of mix and match and things like that. I'm interested to see like what they do, but I think the good thing that I've noticed about this class is I've really enjoyed this cornerback class, man, and I think it's kind of a flavor for like whatever you want. Whether you want a zone corner, you want a man corner, you want somebody that's comfortable and press, can play off the ball, play from a pedal, whatever you want. I feel like you can pretty much find it in this class, and there's a lot of talent. There's depth throughout all really into day 3.
I agree. I also think that there's a better chance for them to significantly upgrade cornerback before we get to the draft than pretty much any other spot on their team. It's a really good free agent class. Guys like Carlton Davis, Rasul Douglas, Byron Murphy, DJ Reed, Asante Samuel, Travarius Ward, a guy like Jair Alexander might get traded. Like, there's a ton of options out there where I feel like if they're spending so much time on defensive line and wide receiver here, and it was not a bad corner group at all, to me that kind of is an indication that maybe they're thinking that way. I do want to bring this up because we wrote about this at the site today too. The new NFL.com mock draft from Eric Edholm has Will Johnson from Michigan falling to the Steelers at 21. What do you think of that idea?
Yeah, I mean, so Johnson, I think some of the top corners like coming into the season, they got hurt and maybe didn't play up to the level of play that they're accustomed to. So I think you're seeing some of that with Will Johnson. He missed a decent chunk of the season. Same with Benjamin Morrison from Notre Dame. Like, those were kind of like the top, like maybe 1 and 2 guys on like a lot of people's summer scouting list. Johnson's a guy that I've really had my eyes on since like he was a freshman at Michigan, like one of those rare guys that steps on the field at 18, 19 years old, like instantly just like looks like he belongs. And I think at a college football program like Michigan, that's usually someone that you want to put down in your notes app, which is pretty much like what mine consists of, just random players that I find like watching, like, oh, I need to keep an eye on this guy. There's a lot to like with Johnson's game. He plays in like a really like zone heavy system, so that's going to be a little bit of an adjustment. But Johnson has absolutely excellent size, man. Like, you look at just like how he's built. He's 6'2", 200 pounds. He's got over 32-inch, I think, verified arms. I think he's a pretty solid athlete. I don't think he's like the best straight line speed guy. I think there's a little bit of tightness in his hips when he's like asked to press, but you just look at like how just instinctual he is as like a zone defender, the plays that he can make on the ball. I think he's a like pretty physical player. He doesn't mind like coming up and supporting the run, can also like jam guys with his length. So there's a lot to like with Johnson as a player. It seemed like getting him at 21 was a little bit of a definitely a long shot, maybe no chance before the season. I still kind of think it's like an outside possibility. I'd be kind of surprised if that happened. But I mean, the medicals with him and with Morrison too, because I think Morrison actually has like a hip injury, or maybe that's Johnson. But either way,
Ravel also,
yeah,
all 3 of those guys are all kind of dealing with injury stuff. Yeah. The thing about Johnson that stands out to me, 9 career interceptions in 32 college games. And again, like you're saying, those are from his day 1 true freshman, 3-year player only coming out early. I think there's a lot to like there. I'm with you. I don't think he'll be there at 21, but if he does, that's probably like, oh, you know what? Never mind what we had playing. Throw that away. Let's go get this guy instead.
Yeah. And another thing with Johnson is, like you mentioned, just like the interceptions, like he had 2 pick sixes just last year before he got hurt.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure. So like, I think both those pick sixes were with him as like a flat defender. I think he jumped one down the right sideline on like kind of a short comeback that a ball was thrown late to the sideline. And then he jumped the screen pass in another game, and I think took it like 90 yards. So yeah, he's a playmaker for sure. And I just think, when you're looking at NFL draft prospects, the more film you have can be a blessing and a curse, because it can expose some of your weaknesses. But I also like it because I think it's comfort food almost for scouts, because you have more of a sample size. Like, what you're getting, like, because of how many games, how many snaps Johnson's played, like against like NFL level competition. Like, you got to think this is a team that's going to play Ohio State every single year. Like, you're getting
Yeah.
like, you can turn on his tape and pretty much find, one-on-one reps against, NFL caliber wide receivers over the last 3 years. And like, that's comforting because you don't have to like use your imagination on what this is going to look like against NFL talent. You already see it. So I think, Johnson definitely, like, I mean, if he's there at that point, I would expect the Steelers to be pretty interested.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. What are your thoughts on Ravel, East Carolina? Not someone I think, the average football fan probably knows a lot about.
Yeah, so I haven't necessarily finished my eval on him. I did watch him a couple times during the season before he got hurt. Obviously, I think he tore his ACL, if I remember
ACL,
correctly.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Ravel's a very interesting player because, like, you just look at the way that he is built. He's almost built in like that kind of Tariq Woolen build in terms of like, he's really tall, he's long, but he's got that really like wiry kind of skinny frame. I think he's like going to come in like almost like 6'2". He's got like over 32.5-inch verified arms, like 84th, 85th percentile. But this kid can absolutely fly too. Like, the straight line speed is evident, the recovery speed is evident. You watch this kid move, and like, there are some plays that he's able to make on the ball that like most people can't. He had at least one interception that I remember from last year where he's playing outside leverage, and a wide receiver basically runs like a high crossing route, those type of man coverage runaway routes, and he ends up coming all the way across the field, undercuts the ball, and then takes it back for a pick six. So, yeah, I mean, he's another guy that plays, like I mentioned, like getting another like press corner. Like, he plays that kind of same technique that Porter does in terms of like being more of like a kick step guy. So like, if they're looking for somebody like that, he would make a lot of sense. I don't think the tape is necessarily as clean as some of the other guys. Like, I don't think his tape is as clean as like Thomas, for example. But in terms of like upside, like, he has as much upside probably as anybody. It's just more about his recovery from the ACL and, getting him against like better competition, which really just sucks for him because he was at the Shrine Bowl, obviously couldn't do anything. But this could have been an event kind of like a little bit like Quinyon Mitchell last year at the Senior Bowl. If he was able to be healthy and go to the Senior Bowl and like kind of compete in this type of setting, probably could have helped his stock to where he could even be drafted like maybe higher than Mitchell was last year, honestly. But unfortunately, that just didn't come to fruition.
Yeah, good shout with the Woolen comparison. Cam Hart last year's class also kind of like that same like tall, long, skinny. But
Mm-hmm.
those guys were like they were like day 3 picks. And so I wonder if, the success those guys have had. Hart obviously started a bunch of games for the Chargers this year. Woolen has been very good. So maybe some guys that like have that look, that body type, those physical traits, maybe not necessarily the cleanest tape. Is that something that you think, maybe teams are going to get on board with that now?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's just like anything else. Like, you're drafting for traits, so it just kind of depends on like what you're like really after. You're not like the guys that have the super high ceiling. So like the crazy, say you have all your measurables, like they look exactly how you want your like position player to look. They have the athletic upside in terms of like their athleticism, and then they have good tape on top of that. Well, guess what? Like, there's only so many of those guys in every draft. Like, you're not
Yeah,
going to find.
right.
Like, you're going to have to develop some of these guys, and a lot of like nobody's a perfect finished prospect out of college either. So you're really just trying to gauge that. I think with Ravel, like, his best football is probably in front of him, or at least I hope so, considering like he comes back and fully recovers from that ACL. One thing that I like about him is last year he had like a 5% missed tackle rate. So like, that's really, really good for a corner. So he was a guy that was able to come up and tackle, had pretty good technique. And I thought like there was evidence on his 2023 film in the games that I saw with him being like willing to come up and play the screen game, engage the blockers, try to get off blocks, make tackles. That's always something that I think is even more pertinent in today's NFL with all the dinking and dunking, quarterbacks getting the ball out quick, throwing it underneath. Like, you need your corners to be able to not only come up and play the run, but also take on blocks, be able to like be aggressive and be some sort of factor out there to where you can eliminate some of those cheap chunk yards from an offensive perspective. But yeah, I mean, Ravel, I'm interested to kind of finish his eval. He only played 3 games this year, so I'm going to try to watch all 3 of those before I kind of wrap things up.
All right, man. Excited to look forward to that. All the rest of the stuff you got cooking on the site coming up to the 2025 NFL Draft. Of course, I'll have a lot of stuff from the Pro Bowl, the Super Bowl this week. Going to talk to a bunch of Steelers, some former Steelers in New Orleans, and all kinds of good stuff. So, got a lot of stuff. Keep rolling at SteelersNow.com. Make sure you go check that out. DB, tell everybody where they can find the rest of your work.
Yep, at Steelers_DB on Twitter and on YouTube. And you can follow all of my written work at SteelersNow.com.
Yeah, and make sure you like, subscribe, hit that bell for notifications here on the YouTube channel. We are so close to 15,000 subscribers. We are 48 away from 15,000. So just Bud Dupree subscribers away. So, yeah, please do that. If you're listening somewhere else, leave us a 5-star review. We really appreciate those. Of course, you can find me at @Saunders_PGH on X, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. PGH Steelers Now is the site's account. That's all we got for today. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And thanks for taking another ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drift.